Welcome to The Woolly Way, a podcast specifically for dairy shepherds. That is, folks wanting to raise sheep for the purpose of harvesting milk. We cover all the things pertaining to raising dairy sheep here, be it animal nutrition, housing, healthcare, lambing tips, cheese making, and even some butchery and fiber arts. After all, if you raise dairy sheep, you are going to have wool, and if your operation is successful, you'll eventually have surplus lambs to decide what to do with. Ethical animal husbandry is the focus here, as well as sustainable agriculture. We want to provide you with the information you need to start and continue your dairy sheep operation in the best way possible for you, your sheep, and this amazing world we live in. So grab a nice cup of sheep milk and let's dive in. Welcome back to The Woolly Way. I'm your host, Rachel Hester. Today we have Sari Fulbright from Fulbright Farmstead. They are in central Montana on 80 acres and are milk cow converts to dairy sheep. Sari turned into a milkmaid after a neighbor rehomed their dairy cow onto Sari's property 10 years ago. And last year she tried sheep cheese, bought my book, and has dived headfirst into dairy shepherding. Sari now makes all the cheese her family eats, and her passion for the different milks brings a lot to the table. So Sari, thanks so much for coming onto the show.
Thank you for having me, Rachel. It's such an honor to be here and meet you.
No problem. Okay, so tell me how you started farming and how you started being a milkmaid. And,
right.
You know, because you're not new to homesteading. You're kind of one of us old guard veterans at this point. So tell the children back in your day, what was starting a homestead like?
Well, I don't even think, it wasn't even a homestead then. It was just, we knew we wanted to be out in the country. My husband was off a ranch, and we just knew we wanted to raise our family in this lifestyle. And so we were so blessed to find the place where we live, and it's 80 acres. And like I was telling you before, the neighbor, he ended up selling us his milk cow. It was a Holstein. She was our first cow. And then it kind of just snowballed from there. We just started getting more milk cows and just loved it. And then, last year I ended up getting dairy sheep, and just, I love them. So.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So let's talk about the dairy cow for a second, and then we'll go into the sheep. So you were saying in the pre-recording conversation, you acquired this cow, and it was a Holstein. So I'm assuming you got a lot of milk every day.
Yes. So she gave us 8 to 10 gallons a day. A lot of milk.
My little Jersey gives me a gallon and a half. So, I mean, she's an older cow, but I cannot imagine. So, and then, you were telling me beforehand, you didn't dive into cheese making right away, right? So what led to that?
So this is what I think happens to so many people, and it's really a pet peeve of mine, is for some reason, everybody tells beginners to start with mozzarella cheese. And to me, it is not a beginner cheese because it's a simple cheese, yes, but that doesn't mean that it's easy, right? It has these little nuances that if you don't get right, then the cheese doesn't turn out and you feel like a failure because you're like, oh, I can't even do this beginner cheese, so I can't do pressed cheeses. And that same thing happened to me. I tried mozzarella and it just did not work for me. And so then I was too scared and, too busy, but really too scared to try any other cheeses for a long time. We have, I don't know if you see it right here. We have this old separator from the 40s.
Oh, wow.
So we utilized that a lot with that cow. So we would constantly separate and make lots of butter and yogurt and kind of those really simple things. And then also back then, bum calves, people would just bring them to us and drop them off. They just didn't want to mess with them. They're like, here, you take
like
it.
Stray dogs, I have this cow, take it.
Right. And now, and we could make a pretty decent earning from that because we get these free calves and raise them on all this extra milk, and then we take them to town in the fall and sell them. But now people want $500, $600, $1,000 for these bum calves, and it's like, you can't make that work anymore. You can't pay that.
No.
we moved on from that, but and that
Mm-hmm.
cow has since, passed on. She was older when we got her, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so that's what I did with the milk then.
Okay. All right. So I'm sorry. I'm hung up on the people just brought you bum calves because to me it's like I've had people do that with chickens and dogs, but to be like, here, I have this calf, just take it is wild to me. But we're in different parts of the country, so
Right.
yeah. But I had heard from people in our area like if you would just pump your cow full of corn and soy, you could have her be a nurse cow to a meat cow. And I think a lot of people who get milk cows, like we're caught up in the beauty of the Laura Ingalls Wilder dress. And we go and sit on the milking stool and milk her, and we have this beautiful milk. And then we get that reality and we're drowning in milk. And it's like, oh, wait a minute. How do I manage the dishes of all the dairying and the
Mhm.
refrigerator space, and then I have to mentally get into the process of chemistry and cheese making. And yeah,
Right.
like you said, I mean, mozzarella is, I think I blame Pinterest, to be honest, because I remember when I first started looking into homesteading stuff, Pinterest was where you went. That was like the mecca for small farming. And it was always like
Mhm.
1 minute mozzarella recipe in your microwave, and you just
Mm.
zap it and then it's fine with pasteurized milk, and you're
Right.
essentially radiating your milk. So of course that's going to be a different animal than your raw
Yeah.
milk with all these other
Right.
things, like you said. So,
Mhm.
um, so yeah, okay. So then the calves got super expensive, which is where I'm more comfortable with. Cows are expensive.
Yes.
So how did you, is that when you started cheese making, or what led you to actually start cheese making?
Um, let's see. I I don't know. I guess just I've always been kind of a an overthinker, an overanalyzer type person.
Mhm.
Overthink every situation and you have to plan everything out and just that's kind of my personality where my husband, he's the opposite. Like he's like do first, think later. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but like he's just
Mhm.
gonna tackle a problem and figure it out as he goes,
Mhm.
where I'm like, "Oh, I have
Mhm.
to know everything beforehand." And
Yeah.
finally, I just kinda had something click in me that I'm like, "I can't just overanalyze things so much anymore. I just gotta start acting more like him and just dive into things and figure it out as I go."
Mhm.
And so I just
Mhm.
kinda made this brain shift. I'm not really sure, what the I don't know, just maybe things getting crazy at the grocery store, and I'm not
Mhm.
sure, but just I had that change, and I got some of my cheese making books, and so I kinda started with Ricky Carroll's and started going through it and just making each cheese, and, I started reading in these books that, well, sheep milk is great for cheese making because you get twice the yield, from all the fat. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to get dairy sheep. And my husband was like vehemently against it. Like, we are not getting sheep. He's a cow man. He grew up on a cattle ranch. And so
Yeah.
he was very, very against it. There's a saying here that if you want to be rich, you raise sheep. If you want to be respected, you raise cows. And I'm not saying I agree
Really?
with that, but that's kind of the mindset around here, or it was, in my husband's grandparents' day, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so, he was just kind of like, no sheep. But then he bought me your book for my birthday and I read it cover to cover in like 3 days. And next thing you knew, I was coming home with sheep. So, and he likes them
Well,
and he loves
that's
their
an
milk.
interesting thing about the mentality because, I mean, I remember when we were getting our dairy sheep, we were corrected by people. They were like, "Oh, no, honey, you mean goats. You're getting goats for dairy." And I was like, "No, no, I do mean sheep. Like, I know what species I bought." And they're like, "But honey, you can't milk sheep." And I'm like,
Oh, funny.
"Well, I'm gonna." But, especially out west where there actually was like a cattle sheep war, essentially.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and I wasn't aware of that when I wrote the book. Like, I've only just started finding out about that in the last year or
Oh,
2.
yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I
Very
think there's a book called Woolly West where he kinda does a deep dive on the nomadic shepherds and how they had to invent this code because the cattle people were, so against them. Um, And so how that still kind of has trickled into our culture today, especially out west, of like, well, everyone knows you can make money and a profit with sheep, but we're still going to do cows because that's the species Americans do, is we do cows. So
Hey guys, I just wanted to interrupt this real quick to give a shout out to our sponsor, the North American Dairy Sheep Association. NADSA is open to any sheep breed or cross used for milking. NADSA supports dairy shepherds and is elevating dairy standards in sheep in America. You can become a member by going to www.northamericadairysheep.org, or you can email the association at northamericadairsheep@gmail.com. I am so thankful to NADSA for sponsoring this podcast and helping me bring more resources to the dairy sheep community. Stay tuned for future podcast episodes where I talk to NADSA board members and the president about what NADSA is trying to accomplish in America for the dairy sheep community.
That's interesting, because a lot of people I've talked to have said, we've always wanted to have sheep, but we just know that sheep are stupid and you can't make money and all of these rumors. And I'm like, that is patently untrue, but you just have to kind of understand, we have had a lot more propaganda in America than I grew up realizing. And
Right.
so being willing to tackle that fact and then be willing to go against the flow and say, no, I really am more of a shepherd than a cow person, takes some moxie, but then so does shepherding. So
Right.
good
Well,
job for
and
sticking it, is what I'm saying. So.
Well, and I mean, I have nothing against cows. I love I still have 2 milk cows, and I got 2 heifers this year. But, another thing is, my girls are a little older, so it's not as big of a deal. But my son, you have a toddler, like, they have a mind of their own, right? They want to go where they go, and they want to do what they want to do. And, he can't just go in the corral with the cows. I mean, if he were to get kicked or stepped on, he'd get seriously injured. But he can go out with the sheep and I don't have to worry, at worst he might get knocked down, but he's not going to get seriously injured, and actually dairy sheep are all so sweet that, you're just out there loving on them all the time. And it's great. I love that I don't have to worry about them. And actually kind of a little side note, but a funny little story, when I was lambing, I lambed through jugs. And right at the start, I had this mature ewe. She had twins. She was in the jug. And I was doing something. My son climbed in the jug. And I just kind of watched him. I said, I don't know if that's a good idea, because I could see this ewe kind of eyeballing him. And he climbed in there. And she did come up and she butt him. Not hard, but like just enough to say, hey, get out of here. You don't belong in here. And then he climbed out and he wasn't hurt. But now, had that been a mom cow, I wouldn't have let him climb in there. But that's kind of my point with kids and sheep. I don't have to worry. With the cows, yeah, I do.
I mean, we have probably the best Jersey milk cow in existence. Like, the Lord just really blessed us with this cow. I mean, we can go up to her in the pasture. She barely needs hobbled or tied to a branch, and we just sit down and milk her. She gave me a concussion by accident. Like, I was brushing her along her brisket area, and she turned right as I was coming up, and we clunked heads. And let me tell you, clunking heads with a cow, I saw stars. Like, I still have a little bit of a knot where that cow hit me. And, compared to my dairy sheep the other day, a fence was down. And so I was standing in the gap to try to keep more from escaping while my husband got the escapees and herd in the back end. And my herd queen, I could see her little eyeballs doing the math between, like, there was 2 inches between me and this branch. And she was like, oh, I'm just gonna be like a show sheep and jump through there. And my soccer training took over, and I just like step in and did the whole soccer stance where you headbutt the ball back in. Do not recommend. So I headbutted a sheep, and it hurt, but I don't have a concussion, right? I mean, it's just I don't recommend. Do not repeat this at home, listeners. Like, don't headbutt your animals. Just don't do it. This is purely just don't do it. But like you said, I have no qualms with my son going in with the ewes, going in right after they've lambed. I mean, there is a weird nonverbal communication the toddlers and sheep have, where the ewes will tell the toddler, back off. And the toddler listens. And I'm like, why don't I get that kind of response?
Right? Can you teach me that?
Right. Versus the cow, I mean, she can see my son. She knows where he's at. But if he's in her blind spot or, she's just kind of moving because of flies, I'm like, you can squish this little human. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and they don't like it doesn't even have to be that they're being ornery. Like you said, they can be the
Right.
nicest cow in the world. Like that first cow
Right.
we had, Molly,
Mhm.
she was just so big. And,
Mhm.
when the flies would come out, she'd just whip her head to
Yeah.
get the flies off her back. And yeah, you had to
Mhm.
make sure you were out of the way because if you were in her whip range, she
Right.
would knock you over because she was just such a big old beast, and she was
Right.
just so sweet. But yeah,
Right.
just sometimes their sheer size. And the same thing, I have another Jersey cow. She's was born here. I've milked her whole life. She's 8 years old.
Mhm. Mhm.
She's really good, really sweet. A while back, I was just getting ready to milk and she happened to stepped on my toe. It still hurts. And that's, she's never done that before. And it wasn't her being nasty. It was just
Right.
I happened to be in the wrong spot and she moved
Right.
and
Right.
it happened.
Yeah, and
So,
I grew up around horses. Horses are really aware of where their feet are. So like
right.
you have to be aware, but you don't have to be paranoid around a horse's foot. Cows
Uh-huh.
do not care. She has stomped on my husband's toes so many times, like, and
Yeah.
he wears appropriate foot gear, so it's not, but the first
Mhm.
time it happened, I'm like, oh, you're going to the hospital, like, you're probably gonna be immobile. And he's like, I wore my steel-toed boots. It's fine. It hurt, but I'm not damaged. I'm like, okay. So, um, yeah, I mean, cows are beautiful creatures and they definitely have their place. But,
Right.
as someone managing smaller kids, it's just a different stress management when the kids want to
Oh,
come help because, as a
yeah.
2-year-old growing up on a farm, my son wants to be everywhere doing everything we're doing. Like he wants to grab the cow
Mhm.
halter and drag her along. And I mean, our cow will let him, but
Mhm.
with the sheep, I'm far more comfortable because a 250 animal is way different from a 2,000-pound animal. So,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and
yeah.
then kind of the other, catalyst more towards the sheep and so the cows. So I kept a heifer, so she calved for the first, excuse me, time this year. And she has been the most ornery one I have had in my 11-year history of having milk cows. She kicked like a mule. And actually, she was my daughter Reagan's heifer. And she was
Mhm.
working with her, and she just was so ornery that she's like,
Mhm.
Mom, can I just have a sheep? Because she was scared to death of her. And I was like,
Oh,
you know what? I'm totally fine with that because when I say she
yeah,
kicks like a mule, I mean, she knows exactly where you're at and she can put her foot right where she wants it. It's amazing. I've never had another cow like that. I've been working with her. She's doing better, but I'm like, yes, go milk a sheep because even on their worst day, you can just
yeah,
hold on to their foot and milk them and everything is fine. Or maybe at worst, tie a
yeah,
leg back. But nobody's going to
yeah,
get hurt like, with a cow kicking. And so,
right. Now, I
yeah,
will say
I've
my
got
Gold
a
Coast natives have left some very nasty bruises on my hands, but I mean,
oh,
it's like a little bruise where I'm like, "What did I do? Oh, the sheep kicked me. That's what."
yeah,
But we do milk heritage feral breeds in addition to the dairy crosses. So, I mean,
I
those East
see.
Friesians, I don't know what breed you have, but I mean, the dairy specific breeds are so gentle in temperament typically. I do know the Iwasi can get a little scary, but,
Oh,
but yeah, the large breeds like the East Friesians are just, big old lap dogs, essentially.
Want to know more about dairy sheep? Did you know that I write books on the topic? There is my big book, which is published by Sawdust Publishing and is available on my website or Amazon and sawdustpublishing.com. In this volume, The Guide to Homestead Dairy Sheep, you will find everything I wished I knew when I first started raising dairy sheep. I feature other dairy shepherds and go into detail on topics like different breeds for milking, parasite management, milk sharing with lambs, how to set your flock up for the best lambing and therefore milking season possible, and I briefly discuss digestion and nutrition of sheep. Since writing this book, folks have asked me questions about more nuanced topics, so I have begun writing ebooks that are topic specific that you can purchase on my website and receive as an instant download and print at your convenience. Currently, we have Bringing Your New Sheep Home, which explains in detail our step-by-step method of introducing new dairy sheep onto your homestead and getting them used to you as their shepherd. Since there are currently no dairy-specific hair breed sheep available, dairy shepherds will have to shear their sheep annually and then decide what to do with their wool. Wool has a lot of misconceptions surrounding it, and I want to help shepherds understand that it is a commodity and not a burden. So I wrote my other ebook, 5 Uses of Wool on the Homestead, which is designed to give you practical ideas on how to utilize this amazing product around your homestead the second you shear it off your sheep. The ebooks are only available on my website at whoopsiedaisyfarm.com.
Yeah, so I have dairy mutts. So
Okay.
dairy sheep are not real popular where I'm at. There's a few around, but not a ton.
Okay.
And when I kind of started to start looking for them, I didn't really realize there was like the whole big world online where everybody puts dairy sheep for sale, and there's transporters and all these things. And even
Where is that? Because I don't know if I found that world yet myself.
yeah. So I just saw a dairy sheep for sale and I think it's all
Oh,
across
the
the
Facebook
US.
page, Dairy Sheep for Sale?
Yeah.
Is that the face?
Yep.
Okay, yeah. I am familiar with that one. Yeah.
But even if I did know about that, I really wanted to find some that I could go to in person. Like I didn't want to buy
Yeah.
something sight unseen. And so
Yeah.
I just kind of ended up with a little bit of mutts. They're East Frisian, Lacoon. I don't know how to say that. I don't think
I
anybody
need to
knows.
get a French person on here, and just the whole podcast episode will be, how do you say your milk sheep's word? Because none of us Americans
Right.
know how to say it. So
Right.
if you're watching this on YouTube
We're-
or listening to this, happen to speak French, please do send me a voice note. How do you say the French breed of milk sheep? Anyway, I digress. So
I actually had a French Canadian guest here, and I actually asked her how to pronounce it. She told me, but I should have recorded it because I forgot what she said already. That was last summer.
And French vowels make sense auditorily, but when you see it written, I'm just like, this is not a phonetic language for my brain. But anyway, okay, so they're East Frisian Lacone. What else do you have in the mix?
So there's a little bit of Merino, which I realize is not a dairy sheep, some Fen and Icelandic, and I think that pretty well covers it. So
Yeah, I saw a bunch of Merinos and Rambouillets at the Maryland Sheep and Wool this last weekend, and they are huge compared to my little hair. Like I said to my husband, I did not realize we had such teeny tiny sheep, and he's like, these are workhorses. So I really just need a 1,000-acre farm where I can have different little sheep cities and raise all the different breeds and experiment with the milk volumes and whatever. So I have heard Merinos do not do well in Kentucky as far as their fleece goes with the humidity. But I would be fascinated with like a Merino East Frisian cross. Of course, neither of those breeds do well in my area of Kentucky, but yeah, okay. So you've got some really fascinating genetics in your mix.
Yeah, they're mutts for sure. But it's funny you mentioned Rambouillet. So Rambouillets are really popular for range sheep around here. Rambouillet, Tarkey, those kind of breeds. And so I was actually thinking about getting a Rambouillet ram to cover my ewe lambs this fall. So a friend of mine, they actually have 600 head of Rambouillets not far from here. And I went to their place last year when they were lambing, and I was so impressed by their udders. I mean, they put my dairy sheep to shame. And so I'm like, wow, they've really worked hard on their milk production. Yep. And so I'm like, yeah, I think I would like one of your rams to cover my ewe lambs, because I definitely think they would bring in more milk. I don't have super high producers, because like I said, I just took what I could find.
Yeah. Well, there's a woman in Australia that I would like to have on the podcast, and she's gone to school for shepherding, because in other countries they have actual shepherding, training, whereas here we're just trying to cobble it together based off of Google searches. And She actually has a whole breeding program of like blue-faced Leicester and Cheviets and then East Friesians. And then she has a like formula of crossing the different fine wool breeds with the dairy breeds to get a very milky, good wool offspring. And she said she actually prefers those crosses for milk production because, you know, when you get the F1 cross, it does things to genetics. But she said, you know, with her program, it's actually yielding a really good tri-purpose sheep of wool, meat, and a lot of milk. So I need to get her on the podcast because, you know, the good dairy sheep genetics in America right now, they're more accessible than they were 5 years ago when I started. If you have $2,000 per head, which I don't. So to learn those, those breeding tricks of like, you can get a less expensive sheep that has a purebred breeders association like a Rambouillet. And if you're strategic about it, you can still get a very good milk harvest. So all that being said, I think your Rambouillet plan might have some really good some merit behind it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm excited. You know, it takes time to get where you want to be. You know, like I said, I started with what I could find, and so I have a lot of improvement to milk production and just their bags, you know, teat length. I have some jelly beans out there, but then I have some but then I have some, you know, with good teat length, and so it's just it's a process, which is hard if you're an impatient person like me, but I'm trying. I'll get there eventually.
Yeah, no, my best milker who has like cow udder teats is half Gulf Coast. Like she is half primitive heritage breed. And then she's only got about a 1/8 East Friesian and 1/8 Awasi in her. And then she's a quarter Icelandic. I think I did the math right. But I mean, she's got the largest udder, the largest teats, the best letdown. Don't touch her and don't try to be her friend. But if you have feed, she will hop onto that stanchion and give you all her milk. And really, she doesn't really like to have the lambs. So if you could just take those off her hands too, she'll give you all her milk. So I'm like, girl, we got to talk. You're fitting the program, but you're not quite fitting the program here. So
right.
But yeah, no, that's a really good point because even people who get dairy specific breeds, I mean, you can still get a high percentage East Friesian who will only give you a quart a day. Like, and I think people don't quite understand the fact that there is merit to these breeds and there's merit in the name, but you really have to understand, you know, investing in a breeding program. And if you want to get good sheep from those breeding programs, you're going to have to invest your money because those shepherds invested their time, blood, sweat, and tears to get to that point. And if you don't want to invest, you know, $1,000 to $2,000 per head, you're going to have to just sign up for the long haul of, we got to see what genes work and what don't work and how we do this. So, yeah, I think that's, a lot of us want plug and play homesteads and plug and play, you know, animals. But I mean, we've been on this property for 8 years and we're just now kind of figuring out what our pastures want and are capable of and what they need. So, that you really have to have a humble attitude of constantly learning and changing.
Oh, definitely. Because things, I mean, they change. Like what worked last year might not work this year. And you have to be flexible for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So, so you got the crossbreeds. Now, were you making cheese with your cow milk before when you got the sheep, or were you still in that process?
I had started probably that summer before I got the sheep, really diving into making cheese with my cows. And then I brought home my first dairy sheep January of 2024. And probably made a little bit of cheese with them that first year, but I've really been focusing on it more this year because that first year it was so funny because we got the sheep specifically for making cheese, and then everybody loved the milk so much that I didn't have any milk left to make cheese. And so we kind of joke because we give my mom milk and she'd come over and I'd say, "Oh, do you need some milk?" And she'd say, "Yeah." And I could barely get out, "Do you want cow milk or sheep milk?" And she'd go, "Sheep." I want sheep milk. Of course.
Oh, that's
So,
great. Yeah, on the opposite spectrum, we have a friend who lives in Indianapolis, and she used to have a farm and a dairy cow, and so she'll come sometimes when we have both animals and milk, and she'll, I'll be like, "Do you want some milk or some cream in your coffee?" And she's like, "Oh yeah." And I'm like, "Well, you got your choice of species. Which one do you want?" She's like, "I don't care. It's all good. It's all milk. I really don't care." And
hmm,
I'm kind of disappointed because I'm like, there is one that's better than the other. Like, just let's just all acknowledge that. Like, I love my cow, but come on. So
right.
anyway, but
Right.
yeah, that is a common problem I have heard when people get their sheep is they're like, "We're gonna make manchego," and it doesn't stay in the refrigerator long enough to make,
Right.
yogurt.
Well,
So
yeah, and even when I do make cheese, my family eats it so fast. I can barely even get it aged, and I mean, it doesn't even get to age, and it's already gone. I'm like, well, gosh, you guys, come on. I'd like to know how this
your
cheese.
flavor profile, and they're like, "No."
Yeah, they just eat it like crazy. So I guess that's a good thing because
Mhm.
you probably know how picky kids can be. And so I feel like
Yeah.
it's a win if they're eating it. And
Yeah.
actually, I have kind of a funny little story. So last summer, I had made, you mentioned manchego. I'm probably saying that
Mhm.
wrong too. I had made a cow milk and a sheep milk version of that.
Mhm.
And my daughters had one of their friends from school over. And I was doing
Mhm.
something with the cheese. And I said, "Oh, you guys want to try some of my cheese?" "Oh, sure." So I give them all a slice. And my daughter's like, "Oh, yeah, it's fine." And their little friend goes, "Oh, that's disgusting. I hate that." And I'm like, "Oh, okay."
Get out. You're no longer welcome here.
And actually, she's a really sweet kid, but it was just kind of like,
Yeah.
"Oh, okay." So I think they've gotten better.
Well, but that's interesting. I was talking to someone else about how your taste buds change when you
Oh,
go
yeah.
from a standard American diet to farm fresh food.
Oh, yeah.
The first time we had, you know, I'm just trying to think of something, but like grass-fed beef, we were just like,
Mhm.
What? It's not wrong, it's not bad, it's just what this is not the beef we bought at the grocery store." And,
Yeah.
when we have people over, like when I first was learning to cook with Whole Foods, I would just be like throwing whatever weird recipe I was trying at the time at them. And so I've had to learn how to kind of respect the American palate when non-farmers come. Because they just, our taste buds are so acclimated to fake food that
Yeah.
when you have real food for the first time, you are just kind of like, that's
What is
that's not what is that? That has way too many flavors for my poor little tongue to handle. So
right. I agree with that 100%. And I think that's something too, is that with cheese making, if I can bring it back to that, is
yeah.
people want to make, the cheeses they're used to buying at the store, especially if they have kids. Like they want to buy the cheeses that their kids are used to. And then they
Mhm.
make cheese at home. And it's not that it's bad, but it's different. It's not the
Right.
same. And so I think you
Mhm.
got to kind of lower your expectations a little bit that, hey,
Mhm.
maybe, the kids aren't going to like this, but if I keep introducing it, they're going to start to
Mhm.
change their taste buds, just like you said, and they'll start to
Right.
like this. Cause I've seen
Yeah.
that with my own family. And,
Mhm.
I was talking to somebody once about cheese making, and she was telling me, I was like, how do I make, my cheese is so crumbly, how do I make it
Mhm.
more pliable like it is in the
Mhm.
store and stuff? And she said, what you don't realize is that okay, so like cheddar, for example, is not
Mhm.
a washed curd cheese. However, the commercial
Mhm.
cheddars that you buy at the grocery store, they are washed, right? Because they're
Mhm.
making them less acidic and just more pleasing to,
Mhm.
the palate that we're
Yeah,
used
yeah.
to and making them that really soft, pliable,
Right.
that's not how a real cheddar tastes, right? But that's what
Yeah.
we're used
Yeah.
to. And yeah, I've
Yeah.
noticed that with my own family, my kids, we try to eat a real, real food, all real food. And
Right.
when they have like little birthday parties at school and people bring stuff, they'll come home and they'll be like, I couldn't finish that cupcake. It just made me feel sick. Or, I don't like
Mhm.
that stuff. And it's like, yes.
Mhm.
And I'm, yeah, yeah,
Yep.
Not that I'm
I get, yeah.
sick, but I'm just so happy that they can tell in their own little bodies that that food makes them not feel good, you know, and they're preferring the homemade good food, you know? So,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. I agree 1,000%. And
Thanks so much for listening to the Woolly Way podcast. We hope you enjoyed our episode and have gleaned at least one tip you can implement in your flock right away. If you liked what you heard, please hit the subscribe button. And if you wouldn't mind, leave us a review. This helps others find our podcast so they can enjoy learning more about dairy sheep along with you. The Woolly Way podcast is a production of Whoopsie Daisy Farm. For updates and information about our show, follow us on Facebook or Instagram, subscribe to our YouTube and email list, and look us up at whoopsiedaisyfarm.com. Have a particular guest you'd like us to host or a topic you'd like us to cover? Fill out our contact form on our website or shoot us an email at whoopsiedaisyfarm@gmail.com. See you next time!